Wow, hello. I couldn't pull off a hello. Oh. This is how prepared I am for this video. So, welcome YouTube nerdies. Some of you have really asked for this, so I prepared and I tried to find out how to best present the brand new PXL-Live from Joyo. So, this would be video number 5 in the series. If you don't quite know what a looper slash switcher does, they are not loopers in the sense that they record you and you can build on. That's a delay looper. This is a looper because it has several effect loops. If you don't really know what they do, watch part 1 in the series where I explain what they do and I show you the 4 different Joyo loopers, the PXL4, PXL8, PXL Pro, and now the PXL-Live. There's also in-depth videos for each one of them. This isn't going to be as in-depth where I actually show you how to program it, because since it has MIDI and is more complicated, there will be, right after this, I will do a kind of like an online video manual. So if you own it and you want to really know what you're doing and what the dealio is, then watch that. Okay. The general idea of the looper switcher is that you have several effects in individual loops, and you don't have to do the whole steppy dancing, tap dancing thing. It just remembers which one of the loops is on. So that's the basic idea. We got 8 loops here, and each of them has a pedal in it. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pedals plus a reverb. Reverb? That's what the bald head's good for. You can actually smack on it. No, excuse me, plus a tuna. So, as for the tuna function, very simple. If you're on any kind of sound, you can hit the mute switch, and now it will send the signal also to the tuna. But it will let the signal through, so you can tune while you're playing and you can hear everything you're doing. Or you can hit it again and now it's completely muted and will send your guitar signal to the tuner, as you can clearly see. And the D is not there. In this setup I had to put the tuner sideways, but I'm fine with it. So you've got a mute switch, which is kind of nice for live situations. The PXL8 is an 8-loop switcher. 8 pedals going from right to left through that, and that's it. And they will all be in front of your amp. Or they could all be, of course, in the effects loop, but it is all one block. Now with the Pro and the Live, you have 2 blocks of 4. which you don't have to use. You could still use it as one 8-channel looper, in which case you just don't plug anything into the loop in 2 and the loop out 2, okay? But the way I have it set up is I've got 4 pedals, which is my compressor, rated boost from Joyo, Exotic AC Plus, and the Milos Popovic Gainiac, the Henning edition. They're drives and a compressor, so they're all in front of the amp, which means I'm plugging the guitar in the input. Compressor is in loop 1, rated boost in loop 2, the Gainiac in loop 3, and the AC Plus from Exotic is in loop 4. And then I go out of loop 1 out, so this whole section goes out into the input of, in this case, the PRS SE20 amp. And I chose this amp today because it has 2 channels which can be foot switched. So the second 4 effects loops doesn't need to be 4 pedals. You could have several pedals in one loop. Is the analog chorus, the Strymon El Capistan, the Strymon Timeline, and the Strymon Flint, in that order. And they're hooked up via loop input 2 and loop output 2. And those 4 are actually in the FX loop of the amp, because I want them behind my drive in case I use the amp distorted. Because they're time-based effects, you want them behind your drive. So we got 2 sets of 4 loops, one in front of the amp, one in the effects loop. Now, the PXL Pro gives you 4 trigger outputs. Now, I always get asked, what is a trigger output? And can I switch my amp with it? Very likely, yes. It is a lot easier if your amp has 1/4-inch inputs for channel switching. So here we go. This is the foot switch that comes with the PRS amp. It is a simple 2-switch foot switch with a 1/4-inch output, and that carries a stereo cable for 2 signals. And that goes into the foot switch input like many amps have, and I can switch between clean and distorted channels, and I can switch my reverb on and off. Now that's a perfect candidate for the PXL-Live because it has 2 trigger outputs. In case your amp has some kind of proprietary cable, you might actually have to build your own cable. It is also possible that it doesn't work, depending on your amp. Now, of course, there are MIDI switchable amps, and that's where the PXL-Live really shines, because it has MIDI out. But let's look at the trigger output first. What I did, I used an insert cable. An insert cable looks like this. It's a stereo cable on one, gotta come down, wee. It is a stereo cable on one side, okay? And it is actually carrying 2 cables, and it is going to, as you can see here, the pink and the blue, 2 cables, 2 mono cables. So it's splitting up a stereo cable into 2 mono cables. And that is what you would need for a dual foot switch like this. And it works like a charm. So that's what I have hooked up here. Trigger output 1 and 2 going to the amp, which means I can switch the channels, and I can switch the reverb on and off. Do I really need that with a Strymon Flint on here? Very likely not, because hell yeah, that's a nice reverb. But hey, I need to show things. And then we've got a MIDI cable going to the timeline. MIDI, for guitar players, that's a big thing. So let me take some coffee before I talk about MIDI. MIDI, developed in 1983 for synthesizers primarily, is a binary language dealing in 8-bit words. What? Yeah, I studied sound design at Berkeley, and I actually need to know that stuff. It's all not so complicated if you just deal with it a little bit. What matters for us guitar players is that we can switch programs with it. which means we're sending a program change message. MIDI can actually control anything. MIDI can control lighting. It could probably control, you know, Lego motors. It can control anything. It's just a set of numbers sending values between 0 and 127. Okay, it's not super high resolution because the highest resolution you can get is a resolution of 127 values, between 0 and 127, or between 1 and 128. But we are sending two different kind of values with the PXL-Live, and it can send program change messages, which is very simple. Just you have programs saved on your amp. For example, I just heard that the Marshall JVM series is MIDI switchable, so you could switch them with the PXL-Live, or Engels or Dietzels, any amp that is MIDI capable. And it can send, I'm going to switch the timeline with it, but it can also send continuous controller messages. Now, what they are highly depends on your product. Okay, let's say that the master volume on your amp actually can be controlled via MIDI. Let's say that the master volume on your amp can be controlled via MIDI. That is very likely to be a continuous controller. So you could actually have a pedal, an expression pedal, sending MIDI signals to your amp, controlling it. Now, this of course can't do continuous. It can send one value, but when switching programs, you could send the value of 127 full blast really loud, and on another program, quieter. You can send two different messages per program, per preset, onto different channels. Oh, my God. Which also means, let's say I've got the timeline and I've got an amp that is MIDI switchable. I could, with the same program, send a program change message to the timeline, switching the delay, and a program change message to the amp, switching the amp. I could have a timeline and another MIDI switchable, an Eventide, or let's stay with Strymon, a Mobius, very nice, what's it called? Modulation pedal. I could have them MIDI through, you know, the cables going through, daisy chaining, and have them on different channels and actually switch different programs. If, follow me on this one, you want to switch more than two devices at the same time, all you would have to do, let's say I've got the timeline and the Mobius and the MIDI switchable amp. I set the amp on channel 2, I set the timeline and the Mobius on channel 1. And in that case, I simply make sure that the timeline and the Mobius have the sounds I want on the same presets. So if I want a sound with a chorus and a nice delay, I simply make sure that they're both on preset number 4 or something like that, because then both of them will be switched to preset number 4 because they're sharing the channel. Already too much information, I bet, but I mean, this is a little bit more complicated. So let me show you a couple of things I did with it. We're on sound number 1, A. Right now we got the compressor on, and the air cup is down, the timeline, and the flint. On B, we have the yellow comp, the rated boost, the timeline, and the flint. But you could hear I switched the programs on the timeline. Up here, I went to a different delay because I'm sending a MIDI message. Now we got the Milos Popovic Gainiac review coming. Killer distortion pedal, completely handmade for an insane price for a boutique handmade pedal. Going into the El Capistan, and that's all that's happening here. Let's see what I got on bank number 2. Oh, that's the AC plus and some delay. That's just the AC plus. Rated boost, El Capistan, and Flint. Put this puppy on. Oh, this is off. Everything's off. Okay, so here's something neat. The timeline can pretty much be controlled by any continuous controller message, and any parameter can be controlled. So for that, I got myself the MIDI implementation chart. Every MIDI capable device has a MIDI implementation chart because the company sets what controller numbers control, you know, what parameter. With keyboards, of course, modulation, pitch bend, and aftertouch, key press, all these things have defined controller numbers that are always the same. Now, I did something kind of cool. I wanted to see if I switch to a certain preset, and at the so I'm going to send a program change message. Let's see. We're going to go into some programming here. Oh. Cool. It's a filter delay. So I'm in here, and that's really confusing. I got the compressor on, the Gainiac, and the timeline. No triggers. So NA, that's actually supposed to stand for MIDI, is on. I'm gonna check E1 is set to PC, meaning program change. I could also set it to a continuous controller, but I will show you that in a second. So to get out of that, I hit mute. A1 shows me the channel. Channel 1 is where the timeline's at. C1 shows me the actual value, which in this case is 15. Now, depending on your device, it takes a little bit trial and error. The timeline has 100 banks of 2 sounds each. So you can't just say, oh, the bank is 35, I'm going to put in 35. Doesn't work, because it also has a bank 0 with 2 sounds, which are already sounds 1 and 2. So blah, blah, blah. So anyway, I found out if you want to get to sound A on bank number 15, for example, you're going to have to double that, so it's 30 plus 1. So 31 would be your sound. And this is very likely bank 7, sound 1. 7 times 2, 14, so you go 15. If you want sound B, I would have to go double the bank number and then plus 2. It took a little bit figuring out, but every device has their own stuff. So then what I did, N1 in this case you don't need because it's just a program change message. E2, let's check it out, is set to continuous controller. So that's the second MIDI message. All the ones are MIDI message 1, all the 2s are MIDI message 2. Second MIDI message, A2 also channel 1, C2 is 15. Because the mix, you can see that the mix parameter on the timeline is actually 14. Now, because they are seeing 0 as a value and Joyo doesn't, it's removed 1. Again, trial and error. So whatever it says here, you gotta add 1. So I'm setting my mix with the N2. First you define what continuous controller, and then how high. N2 is on 128. The decimal point tells you that there's actually 1 in front of it. So I'm setting the mix all the way up, okay? So what that does is, what that will do is, I go to it and I'm only getting my delayed signal. With the drive, that's actually really cool sound. Now remember, that mix setting is not saved in the timeline. I'm actually doing it, I'm sending the timeline, the mix setting with the PXL-Live. Now, how much sense does this make? You might as well just save that preset with the mix setting at that point. I was just trying to make a point. You could send any continuous controller. Now, let's go forward. I programmed continuous controllers for the looper control, which, funny enough, is even active when the timeline isn't in looper mode. Let's check that out. Meaning, the overdubbing loop mode. And I have my whole bank 3 set to loop mode. B is doing nothing but sending a, it keeps it on, keeps whatever sounds I want on, and it's sending an overdub message, a play message, and a stop message. So let's try this. So, and here we go. So my bank number 3 becomes my looper control. Okay. Of course, there are some restrictions, some things that don't quite work. Let me show you. If I'm in looper mode, okay, and I'm playing, and now I go to overdub. Overdub is on, and I want to turn overdub off. What I do is I push overdub again, and now it just keeps on playing exactly where it was, just overdub is off. Now, by controlling it with the PXL-Live, if you push the button again, it won't send the MIDI message again. I mean, it could, because you can also send MIDI message on button off. So pretty much when you go into bypass mode, you can send a trigger or a MIDI message, which is neat. I'll explain why in a second. But it will of course turn all the loops off. So that doesn't work. So what you would, I will show you. So it turned all the loops off, so it doesn't work. So you would have to press it again. Even if you send the off signal on bypass, it still will turn the delay off. Workaround is pretty much to double whatever you did here, meaning the record button, here, and then you can just switch over there and pretty much have two buttons that do the same thing, and that way you can toggle. So if you want to toggle something, that's the way to do it. There are workarounds. Do you really need looper control right here instead of doing it over there? It's just something you can do. I think it's kind of neat because I don't have to step around on the pedal board. Plus the cool thing is I don't have to hit the timeline looper button for quite a while till it goes into that mode, because it works in the background. Talking about doing stuff in bypass, let me show you the trigger controls. Here we have a clean sound. Just the amp on clean. I programmed that on B. Okay, nothing's on, it's just sending a trigger signal. On A, I've got the amp on clean, but with the amp's reverb on. As you can see, trigger number 2 is on. Now, if I hit A again, it will go into bypass. So nothing is going through the PXL-Live, but it can still send a trigger or MIDI signal. Now, why would you need that when you're turning it off? Well, what if you want to switch your amp? You want to turn all the effects off, no loop is on, but you want to switch your amp to a different channel. Now, you could do that with the MB, the MIDI bypass, or the EB, I think it's the trigger when it's bypassed. And that works like this. So the amp switches channel even when I'm going out of a preset. So that's pretty neat. With this functionality, you will definitely find workarounds for many situations that you need. As you can see, this pedal board is very, very tightly stacked, and on very small space, I have 9 pedals, a MIDI capable looper switcher, all on a Joyo board, which actually fits into the nice RD2 case. And I'm able to switch 2 things on my amp. I'm able to do MIDI switching, control, continuous controllers. I can even control the looper. If you think about what you want and you create your presets, this will take some time. This will take some trial and error. But yesterday I relatively quickly did some programming on the fly. Okay, I want that delay preset. What is that? 75. Okay, bang bang. And if you played around with it for a day, you can actually do adjustments live on the spot if you want that. Now, where do you get these? I always get the question. Well, the PXL-Live is available at, I think it's Go4Music. It's a German website. They will deliver worldwide. So if you're in Europe, you can order from there. Their pricing is insane. They have most of the Joyo products. They have all the loopers and switches. The PXL-Live, no shit, $169.95, I think, $170. For that product, that's just crazy. I'm sorry, that is completely crazy. So go get it. That's all I can say. Okay. If you don't need MIDI capability but more switching functions, more and more trigger outputs, the PXL Pro is for you. If you have anything MIDI capable or you're planning on getting something MIDI capable, this is killer. It will take some getting used to programming wise, but what can I say? This works for me, and I've got a very small board with a lot of options and everything at the touch of a button. So now I'm gonna have to find out how to explain this stuff in depth. See ya.